Hello, everyone. Welcome to a new episode of One Vision. This is Theo, your host for the episode. Joining us today is a new friend of mine that we met through Threats. And this is Bhuva Shakti, sustainable tech consultant, fractional COO, and angel investor. Welcome to the show.
Thanks, Theo. Thanks for having me. Great to be chatting today.
This is so cool. And I can't wait to actually meet you in person in New York. But till then, we'll talk here and we'll talk online. Before we start, though, can you tell us a little bit more about what you do? And curious to know from your perspective, what is a fractional COO?
Sure. I've had a very long career on Wall Street. I think this is the 26th year, if I'm not mistaken. Most of my work has been advising investment banks. I've led global transformation portfolios in the range of $300 million and so on. But a few years back, I took a step back and I did a reflection, around the pandemic time as well, as to what I'm doing in the financial sector. Is it also helping people around me and my community instead of just making profits? And that's when I started serving as a board director for several global nonprofits. I helped build communities for women, fintech, and climate in the past few years while still maintaining my position on Wall Street. And over time, I got opportunity to advise the boards and CEOs at growth stage startups, right? Predominantly in US, they'd reach out to me to talk about product engineering, but then also how to do digital transformation in a small scale, though I've done that on Wall Street, right? So, and also primarily startup challenges include fundraising. You have to raise different types of funds through different stages of your startup, but the founders are still to get that financial and leadership experience in their careers. And one other challenge they had was market expansion, right? So it's not that you are in one market and you're happy and you're good to close out the strategy, but then you're constantly thinking about where to expand. So this is where I thought, okay, so I bring corporate experience, nonprofit experience, and startup leadership experience. And because people were constantly reaching out to me, I thought, okay, let me launch my own advisory business. I call it Bhuva's Impact Global, in short, BIG. I have a lot of ambition to drive big transformations, but I predominantly focus on the fintech and the sustainability sector. So those are the two areas of work. And I work with late stage startups as a fractional COO. So more like a chief operating officer in a fractional capacity. So startups, when they are fundraising Series A or beyond, they don't have to, pay for a full-time fractional COO, right? So I advise startups, especially the board of directors and CEOs at startups that are fundraising Series A and beyond, in three areas. So one is risk governance. I know it's a loaded term, but it's very essential when you run a business, small or big. I work with the C-suite on the startup board as well as the CEO. I help them implement comprehensive risk management frameworks. So it need not be only financial risk, but I also help them proactively manage operational risks, global market expansion risks, fundraising risks, and so on. So that's one area where I support as a fractional COO. The other area is digital transformation. So like I said, I've done that at a large scale, but then the upcoming startups are looking to do this on a smaller scale, but also ensuring how do we combine innovation and ethics. I advise them more on the responsible use of technology, especially artificial intelligence. But then when you're a startup, you're more concerned about scaling and how can you be more agile. So it's a good balance of doing digital transformation where I work with them to balance scale, agility, and also responsible use. And the third area that I work with them is the ESG sustainability space. So I provide oversight to integrate ESG regulations, that's environmental, social, and governance regulations into their business strategy and vision. So they are not, two disjointed services or strategies, but they are an integrated strategy. And I know in our earlier conversations, I've spoken to you a lot about financial inclusion, which is a very near and dear passion to me. So I work with startups to bring in more diversity and equity in their board and workforce. But I'm also equally committed to solving the climate crisis, right? So, for example, every company need not be a climate scientific company, but every company has a responsibility towards a better environment, eliminating waste, bringing more justice in terms of climate and finance. So I think I've been able to guide the future CEOs with my leadership experience as a fractional COO in risk, digital, and ESG spaces. So it's more like a fractional C-suite person you get, but not have to pay full time as a startup that's fundraising.
I was going to ask, when do you sleep? That is a lot. I'm convinced that you're a superhuman. I mean, that's it. You were involved with so many things, like the list of things that you were talking about, the roles and things that you perform, and people that you advised. And it's not just in the US, it's around the world. It what strike me is really interesting and looking through your portfolio and talking to you is that this is not something that is traditional, right? Thinking back decades ago, that is not how we work. But yet, here you are telling us about your journey, telling us about what you do and how you help different companies succeed from a strategy, from a governance, from a risk, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera perspective. So this is what I'm going to ask you, because some will say that changes around how we work, right? The future of work, if you will, has allowed and enabled, empowered, if you will, different demographics of people take advantage of different opportunities that they otherwise wouldn't have been able to. Think back 2 decades ago. And some would attribute the changes in retirement mindset, and that's a new one that I heard, to evolution of hybrid work, digital nomads, because now we can work practically anywhere, any time zone that we want. We are not tied to a physical office, and that opens up more opportunities. Curious to hear your thoughts and how the changes in how we work and the attitude towards work, and what do you think the future will hold? Will we see more people following you, following your path and being a fractional COO, doing things in different capacities?
I think so. I think so. I mean, I don't know about everyone, but though pandemic was a very sad thing for people globally, I think it has helped me in a way that I'm able to spread my wings into other areas. Because typically I would be going to my office on Wall Street in the morning, coming back in the evening, 5 days a week, right? There has not been opportunities to do anything else otherwise. Or if there are events or other thought leadership discussions, they are happening in and around your workplace typically, so you don't have opportunity to work with communities outside your immediate peers, right? So I think the pandemic has more normalized these situations, and I would say it's a big for me to have expanded more into the impact and innovation space beyond just Wall Street. So it was only because of working remotely and in hybrid models I was able to work with nonprofits and startups globally. Not just if they are not in New York City, I never get to know them, right? So I think it is not that people's productivity has decreased. In fact, I think people are more focused on engagement when it comes to remote and hybrid working models, and it's here to stay. But the productivity is also increased in the sense they are able to plan their work better, so they are able to perform higher within a given time frame, so they can spend remaining time of their lives in other things that interest them, that are passionate for them, right? So I would definitely say remote and hybrid working model as number one that has helped me and several others. And secondly, artificial intelligence, right? So I've done quite a lot of work in AI, but predominantly using AI in fintech and climate to bring in more inclusion as well as more environment awareness. I also hear this theory where it may displace some jobs, but I think it happens with every revolution, right? So, for example, we had the Industrial Revolution like 100 years back. It did replace certain jobs, but it has made our lives much better. So, just because us trying to fear AI or automation, it's not going to go away. But I think what we can do is embrace it more responsibly so it can enhance what we do on a daily basis much more efficiently, right? So I think artificial intelligence is another area that has helped us a lot in the past few years and is here to stay, but it's not going to replace. Now, other area that has also really helped me and a lot of communities that I work with and startups that I work with is inclusion and mental health. So though mental health has been a topic pre-pandemic, it is now at the forefront. Earlier, when there was stigma to talk about it, now there is more openness, both from people and the business side, to balance work and life for people with mental health challenges. Also, to not even get into a mental health challenge. So, how do we bring up a culture that is more inclusive, right? And also, a lot of businesses, large corporations, governments, and academia, those startups with more inclusion first approach is my thought, are looking for diverse voices, right? So if you don't have diverse voices, you are not building a business for all people. You're building it only for certain people. So I think these are three areas where there is a lot of focus and a welcoming approach post pandemic, though they have existed prior to that. The last one I would definitely say is sustainability and climate responsibility, right? Like I said earlier, I'm a fractional COO for startups, but not to define sustainability as a separate strategy from corporate strategy. Every day we work to combine a responsible climate approach into our corporate governance. So it's inherent at the C-suite top level, at the middle management level, and also at the workforce level, right? That's on the ground. So it's not going to be a separate topic, rather it's going to be inbuilt into every aspect of policy and decision making within a corporate. I mean, included with that is data privacy, right? We spoke about AI earlier, but then if we are not feeding it data that is more responsible, collected with user consent, protecting their privacy and sensitivity, then that data is considered biased data. And on top of it, whatever decisions we make is not going to be useful for us. So I think remote working, AI, inclusion, sustainability, privacy are all things that I have benefited from. And the startups that I advise also do a lot of work, and it's here to stay.
It is here to stay. I think I do personally, though, see some quote unquote backlash, if you will, when it comes to DEI, especially given the state of, shall we say, diversity in leadership in a lot of the larger companies. There's still a lot of work that needs to be done. The thing, though, is I don't think we can change the trend. The world is moving in a certain direction. As much as there might be resistance to change, I think in the end, hopefully, this is the optimistic Theo thinking. We will get there. Hopefully we will get there. I do want to ask you something, looking back, right? You had mentioned the pandemic, how it normalized remote work, hybrid work, and allow us to tap into talent around the world and be able to help different people. I know one of the topics that you're super passionate about in the show, based on what you were just talking about in the past 10 minutes, is how emerging technologies are shaping financial services. Looking back at how the ecosystem has evolved, looking back, thinking back at how we had iPhones, and that enabled us to be able to get a ride in the middle of the city, being able to order food, being able to move money on the go, et cetera, and enabling neobanks, enabling new ways of managing money, PFM tools, et cetera. Did anything catch you by surprise, looking at the speed of change and how things have changed?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I spoke extensively about AI, but in addition to that, I've also done quite a lot of work in blockchain, cloud, and IoT, as well as robotic process automation. We do that extensively on Wall Street, right? So we've used that in several aspects of financial services. But one thing with blockchain that we noticed was, though it helped us with speed and accuracy, cost savings in terms of financial transactions, and whenever we had to do cross-border payment transactions, there are not a lot of regulations when it comes to blockchain yet. So the banks and larger financial institutions are slightly hesitant. Startups were at the forefront, but just last week there was a blockchain crypto CEO who was sent to jail for fraud, right? So though it is starting to pick up pace, I have not seen a huge expansion using blockchain. On the other hand, I've used cloud computing for quite a long time. These days, even though within financial services, we see cloud computing helps us to, scale very, very quickly. I'm also concerned about the environment hazard, right? Because the more the size of servers, the more the energy requirement and carbon emission. You are scaling your infrastructure, but you're not doing anything to achieve net zero, right? So all corporations are also concerned about reducing emissions while scaling using cloud. So that's a welcome news. Regarding RPA, robotic process automation, I think I've been using this for many years. I don't even remember since when, could be a couple of decades. But it's a long, long before AI was used. It's a great way to automate repetitive financial transaction rules. So it has helped us quite a lot in regulatory compliance, audits, and reporting. So I would say technologies do help us. Some of the additional technologies, I have not used them myself, but I intend to, especially like quantum computing, 5G, AR, VR. I've not used them yet, but that's something I want to explore in the financial advisory space as and when I work with startups. But one area in the AR, VR I've noticed is I'm advising a startup in this space as well. So I think we are doing a lot of simulation and training exercises for employees, which provides them realistic scenarios for financial analysis, forecasting, and things like that. So it's a little bit better way to learn than the traditional learning model. What has surprised me, definitely I would say 5G, right? I know there is a lot of potential for it to give us more real-time data processing and so on, especially nowadays. We see mobile trading platforms, right, in financial services. So these ultra fast speeds using 5G is going to be really helpful to expand your mobile financial services offerings, right? So if it's a fintech or neobank or a financial institution. But I keep thinking there is a lot of disparity that already exists with the digital inclusion, right? So starting with the pandemic also, where I noticed so many people didn't even have basic internet connectivity for education services or even emergency healthcare, right? Why are we not solving those problems and trying to give an equal platform for everyone instead of trying to focus on 5G, which will help mobile trading or make it much faster for financial services for people who can afford to, right? So that has really surprised me, where instead of ensuring equal access with existing technologies, why are we behind new technologies all the time that increase the gap in inclusion? And I don't know if you have seen that. I've been seeing some ads on TV these days where they're talking about 10G. I don't even know if it's realistic, but yeah, the 5G 10G concept is really surprising to me, and I don't know if it really helps inclusion, but I'm sure it only expands the gap.
One of my favorite lines I often say is there's no financial inclusion without digital inclusion, especially
Yeah.
as we keep moving things to mobile. And as you say, not everyone have access to high-speed internet at home, and definitely not everyone can afford mobile access on the phones. Those are things that we don't think about. And now we're all talking about, oh, what about X? What about, I have not heard 10G, but I've heard 6G. And as much as I love technology and I'm a complete nerd at heart, I do think about that. I do worry about that because it feels like we are making the gap larger instead of closing the gap. Similarly with AI, and I know we cannot get by a day without talking about AI, but think about the people that have access to these tools to improve what we do, to make things more efficient, to learn things. You also need digital literacy and you need digital access. Without those and without being able to afford the access and the equipment, you can't get there. And yet again, I feel like that's another thing we're doing, that we're increasing the gap. So lots to be done. And I do agree that is one surprising thing. I thought we would be able to do better by now. And going back to AI a little bit, we're going in and out of that. I'm trying not to use the word AI, and I don't think I've been able to be successful. Every day we say something about AI, and I was joking to someone on stage that if I were to get paid $1 every time someone uttered the word AI, I think I would be so rich. I don't have to keep working. I'll just retire.
So true.
Right?
Yeah.
Now, one might say that we're going through an arms race. And I feel like we do, because you look at the companies that are in the spotlight, you look at how much money and how much resources being spent. Scale matters. Now, where do you see the space evolve in the next few years, particularly with respect to how it is being deployed in our ecosystem? What is it being used for? Use cases? Who is it being addressed for? Who is it servicing, if you will, for lack of better words? And what keeps you up at night? And hopefully, we'll end with a positive note. What gives you hope?
Yeah, no, definitely. So I know I agree. Not a day goes by me telling AI at least a few times, knowingly or unknowingly. But I think it's like any other technology. I've seen the evolution of technology over a couple of decades now. Whenever there is a new technology, there is always some concern, and that's good because where we get more opportunities for efficiency, we also will have challenges. Like, for example, with AI, I see we get huge benefits in the financial services sector, and not only financial services, in all sectors, with increased efficiency and productivity, right? So there's a lot of repetitive and time consuming tasks. I think it's better served that a machine is able to do that so that we people can focus on our creative strategy capabilities, right? So we are better suited for interpersonal interactions, and I think it's not going to replace us in that manner. And also, I think in financial services, we've taken a big leap. So in early days, I remember that we can process only structured data. With all the real-time, near real-time trading platforms, still we could not leverage unstructured data in like few years ago, but these days we are able to process large amounts of structured and unstructured data using AI. The speed is unbelievable. We are able to get accurate trends and predictions, but then the decision is made by humans, right? So the decision also should not be driven by AI primarily, because there should be humans in the loop. So that's where I see how AI and us can work together. But even though there are so many benefits, like with everything else, there is a lot of ethical concerns, there's a lot of societal concerns. Like we spoke earlier, if we can't achieve digital inclusion, how can we achieve financial inclusion? Similarly, here, if ethical aspects and responsible use of technology cannot be prioritized, there is no way the efficiency and productivity that we get from using AI is going to help us in the long term, right? So we use it every day in real time trading platforms, risk predictions, but there is a lot of systemic bias that's built in, sometimes knowingly, sometimes unconsciously. So as an example, some of the AI algorithms that we use, they are trained on biased data because they have been collected systemically and historically. So when you want to determine the credit worthiness or insurance premiums or investment strategies, you are essentially using biased data and historical rules based algorithms that bring in more discrimination against women and underrepresented communities, which are two areas I work in. So, as a financial services leader, there is no fairness in the financial services decision that you are making. And how can we eliminate that should be really, really critical than just implementing a brand new technology, right? So sometimes there is no regulation also in the financial services sector as of today that can be accountable, right? For example, these are more like black boxes. There is less transparency in the business rules, but then the decisions that are made using them for denying loans or credits for day-to-day people, for women, for underrepresented communities, they are not transparently shared by the financial institutions. So, that only increases distrust. Already there is distrust, and then bring in AI and use it with historical biased data and algorithms, and then there is more misuse and discrimination. So that's what keeps me up at night. I think not just bringing AI as a technology, but how can we ensure ethical and responsible use of the technology, ensure privacy and sensitivity of the data. It's built on top of, but I think what also gives me hope is in the last year and this year, you would have seen the US government, the UK, the EU, they've all stepped up and have brought in regulations, not only for financial services, but how do we use AI in media, music, education, every sector, right? So it's not just going to slow down technological advancements. I think mostly we will be talking about increasing regulations, at least in the near term, though not in the long term, so that we can ensure public safety and societal privacy. I also welcome these regulations. I know it's not a good word on many corporation and startup agendas, but then without regulations at the start of a technology advancement, we will not be able to protect even intellectual property rights, right? So I think more the financial institutions are able to embrace these, I think people will have better trust in their leadership and their decision making. And I think once it becomes the norm, like remote working during pandemic, we may not need the regulatory oversight. Rather, it becomes part of your day-to-day strategy of the business. I think that's my hope.
I do agree the need for more regulation, it feels like, is running wild, wild west. If you think about how the technology is being used back, let's say a few years ago, right? You use a lot of tools to recommend, let's say, different music to understand your tastes and what you like to read and what you like to buy. If you make a mistake there, well, it's not good, but it's fine. But when it comes to our money and our data, our privacy, and all of that, if you misuse that, if you turn down loan for someone without explaining why, I think that's a much bigger issue, right? Or recently, I think we heard about a case of an Uber worker in the UK that got dismissed by Uber because, quote unquote, he had too many instances where his face could not be validated through the facial recognition system.
Mm-hmm.
As it
Yeah.
turns out, it was because of his race, and the system does not do a good job in
Yes.
recognizing, certain demographics of people. So it's not because he did something, it's because of how the system was set up and how it has been trained with data, right? And it has direct impact on people, negative impact on people and their livelihood, on everything else. So that's definitely gives me pause that we need to think about, wait, this is not just like, using the tool to create some cute graphics or videos anymore. This is our lives. So what can we do to make it better, to make it not just more inclusive, but make it right so that it doesn't hurt people? I think
Mm-hmm.
that's going to be a challenge of our modern times. Now, when we talk about inclusiveness, going back to something we talked about earlier in the beginning of the conversation, there is no lack of awareness of we need to be more inclusive. There's no lack of awareness that we need to focus on DEI, although it depends on which part of the country you're in. That's a dirty word.
Yeah.
Yet the stats can be pretty disappointing at times. Look at the amount of funding that goes to underrepresented demographics. Look at the number of Black founders. Look at how hard it has been for women to raise money, et cetera, et cetera. While the awareness has I would say, gotten better. The actual situation has not improved. Do you think the world will change eventually? I'm like trying to think about like every year, World Economic Forum publishes the gender gap report. And every year I look at it, it's like, oh my God, yet another 100, I don't know, 50 years before you can get to economic equality. I'm like, okay, so not only will I not see the change, which, yeah, I can't really see change right now, and my daughter wouldn't see the change, and her kids probably wouldn't even see the change. And you start thinking about it like, wait a minute, what are we doing wrong? What should we be doing more?
Yeah, no, so true. And I'll give another example also where I think before the pandemic, female founders had 2.1% or something like that of funding that was going to them. But then post pandemic, I would have expected that to remain at 2 point something or increased. But I think it decreased. And that's really very disheartening. And that's why I started investing myself in women led startups, because change begins somewhere. But I think change is happening very slowly, but in a much smaller scale or in smaller geographies or smaller communities. But that's not going to help us see a systemic shift, right? Because unless there are big changes at a larger scale that can transform larger communities in one go, instead of going one person by person, it's not going to systemically change or positively impact the affected communities and people, right? So I'm a big believer of public private partnerships, because in my nonprofit and startups board director work, I constantly bring in government agencies, financial institutions, fintechs, and also local communities to successfully execute financial inclusion projects, because it's not just going to happen by talking to banks or at universities. So I come from Columbia Universities. We do talk a lot, but things don't move unless we bring all parties to the table and do a joint project. And we focus on two different types of population. I think you know this much better also. So the unbanked and the banked, right? So we go through the AI algorithms and also see where and how it fits in the financial ecosystem. I predominantly work with women, and historically there has been unconscious bias, like we spoke earlier, on data, on the algorithm, and so on. So I think recently Visa also published some research where gender bias, I know all other biases exist, but gender bias tops the chart, where denials and discrimination has happened in giving credit or loans or insurance policies to women and women-led businesses, right? So that has to change. But if we don't enforce change with financial systems, then consumers are not going to confidently share data, give consent, and then their AI is never going to improve, because it's going to be running again on that biased data. But also, what gives me hope is generative AI, not a good word, but I think it does a little bit help us advance or accelerate the inclusion agenda, including use of synthetic data. But I'm not recommending just use generative AI and synthetic data. We definitely should have humans 100% in the loop. So one example of using synthetic data is, if you have a data set that has gaps, that doesn't address systemic discrimination, then you can fill in that data using synthetic data that can model certain ideal profiles of your customers. That way you can have a complete data set on which you can build your AI algorithms or anything that you make a decision on, so that it is an inclusive decision and not excluding certain populations, right? But then we have to be really, really careful, because recently, using synthetic data, a large bank on Wall Street had to, go to court because it was suing another startup which it acquired, which sold synthetic data as real data, right? So I know synthetic data is going to be helpful, but then definitely keep people in loop and don't overuse it, but predominantly try to use it to fill the gaps in data to eliminate discrimination. And another area where I've seen generative AI help is also when you are a startup, a women-led startup, much more difficult to get funding or grants or loans or things like that. Generative AI can also model a customer profile, right? So you don't need to have traditional criteria to get a loan or a grant or funding. Rather, it can model an alternate profile based on what you have, rather what you don't have, and can still enable alternate evaluation criteria for better credit decisioning, right? So that's advantageous in two ways. One, you are including a set of population that has been historically excluded because historically they never met the criteria, but it's also good business for banks, right? So that's what I see. When you talk about DEI, ESG, CSR, and everything, it's not just for people, but it's good business also. So your risk exposure is less. You're better diversifying your portfolio. You're accommodating your products and services for a lot of demographics instead of one demographic. So I think those are things that give me hope in terms of technology, but then definitely building a tighter governance around your corporate decisions is also critical, to make it happen.
I like that. Ending with hope. Now, if there's one advice that you would give to startup founders, what would that be?
So I'm a founder of my own business as well, right? I know a lot of founders feel this way, but every time it's a difficult decision. So do I go after comfort or passion? But I'd say it's more concerning when it comes to women-led startups, even in US, in many geographies, in advanced economies. I think we lack role models. I would say we lack advocates or mentors to support us throughout our journey. So I would say one advice would definitely be building supportive network along with finding mentors, because for us to succeed and grow, it's very critical to be part of a community that's understanding, that has people who know you, who understand your struggles. And if they have done it prior to you, why are you reinventing the wheel, right? So join a good community, be part of good mentorship programs. I think that would be the best advice for any founder than anything that's technical, that will anyway come along the way.
I can't agree more. I think entrepreneurship can be a very lonely journey if you
Mhm.
go at it alone. And there are many of us. So do tap in. And that's how we grow and that's how we thrive, is to be there for each other. So thank you so much for your time today, Bhuva. I really do look forward to meeting you in person soon. Hopefully one day we'll make it happen this year. But till then, thank you. And thank you for spending time with us. And for the rest of our listeners, thank you so much for joining us for another episode of One Vision. We'll talk to you all next week.
Thanks a lot, Theo. Hope to see you soon.